talking with God about kings and kingdoms. 1 Kings chapter 11. And the title of this week's talk is, well, a heart attack you ought to know by now. Come on in, let's check it out together.
All the Bubbas of the world, we got one mission in mind.
Welcome to the Biblical Channel. Always glad somebody is showing up because we are trying to take people from the bullshit to, well, the holy shit, and in hopes that you might know your shit and talk some, well, just shoot the shit with others. That's our goal at the Biblical Channel, to be bringing the God-given word into our lives so that our lives will be improved. Our lives and the lives of everybody will be improved. We are absolutely convinced. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing this thing. If I didn't think that wholeheartedly that, the God that made the whole entire universe, including ourselves, also put together this little book right here so that we might know his story and know our story as well. Well, I wouldn't do it. I simply wouldn't do it. And I'm glad you're here. And anyhow, we're in chapter 11 of 1 Kings. Just the first 13 verses, though. That's where we're going to be. So, without any further ado, let's go forward. And as soon as we go forward, the tires start to screech. And boom, through the guardrails. And the car is suspended in midair, careening down the cliff in the opening lines of chapter 11. We heard Solomon, given the car keys to the kingdom of God, squeal the tires a bit, and it looked a little shaky at times, but all in all, it looked really good too. And he passed the driver's test because that Queen of Sheba came up and said, "You're doing a great job," and that is God's gal from Sheba, from Ethiopia, coming up and being the judge on Solomon's activity, and she judges Solomon's activity to be good. However, Sheba's gone, and Solomon gets reckless. Absolutely reckless, and he absolutely wrecks the car. But you ought to know by now. And the text tells us over and over again that this is a heart issue. The word heart comes up so much, that this is really a heart attack. That this is a heart attack that, well, is fatal. Heart attacks are serious, In fact, we have that little phrase, serious as a heart attack. My father died of a heart attack at the age of 41. Now, it didn't help any that he smoked a lot of cigarettes and drank a lot of beer and ignored the fact that he was put in the hospital in his 20s for high blood pressure. However, we do know that heart attacks are serious. In fact, a lot of us, especially as you get older like me, start fearing the old heart attack because, man alive. But there are signs, aren't there? I mean, we ought to know by now. So let's not ignore the signs. And by now, even though we are pulling for the kingdom, as we read this story, we're pulling for God's kingdom. We want God's kingdom to be a success. We know without a doubt that it was going to crash and burn. Why? Because humans crash and burn things. God builds things up and humans ruin them. That is the narrative that the Bible, that God gives us, is that, God is good and we, not always, mostly because we don't know the difference between good and evil, and we don't know that we ought to spend our whole devotional heart being in love with God and following after the things that God gives us. There you go. That's God's perspective. And God is a lover. He loves us, and he is after us despite our, wicked ways, despite our evilness. He still stands in the gap for us. There you go, my friends. But here we go. Solomon, his heart attack, you ought to know by now. Famous line out of a Billy Joel song. But we're borrowing that. We also could have said that this is a total eclipse of the heart. You remember that song? And we might have also titled this "The Smart Ass," that Solomon has uncanny wisdom, uncanny smartness that bleeds off into every educational scene there is, it seems, we're told. And also that he is an ass now. because, well, let's just get to the cause. The cause, the high blood pressure of Solomon's heart attack is, well, King Solomon loved many foreign women. And so this, loving many foreign women just gets ridiculous. Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, Hittites. He loved them all, baby. He might we say he is our ancient world Wilt Chamberlain. Now, old Wilt claims that he had sexual relations with 20,000 women. And don't forget that even though he bragged about that in his book, or at least seemed like he was bragging, as Wilt went on in his life, he made it very clear to men that he would have been better off making love to one woman 20,000 times than 20,000 women all those times. So let's remember old Wilt cleaned up his perspective on his activities, and Solomon, I suspect, did too. We have lots of good writings of Solomon. Not exactly sure when he writes this stuff, but it seems as though, especially the book of Ecclesiastes, is a book and a writing that Solomon probably put together or had put together reflecting on his own folly. His wisdom was eclipsed by his own folly. The wisdom that God had given him had become darkened by his own heart attack, and it was nobody's fault but his own. But nothing's new under the sun, as the author of Ecclesiastes tells us, and everything in the end is vanity except for your love and devotion to God. So I do think Solomon ends right, but this is the crashing and the burning of Solomon's life as it related to all these women. We had these suspicions whenever he reached out and made a foreign pact with the Egyptian daughter. Not a big deal, and certainly not enough to cause us dismay. But we had an inkling. We should have known by now. And the problem that God addresses with all of these women is not necessarily all of these women, although that's the problem, but it's the heart that is the problem. It's that all of these women caused Solomon's heart to lose its love for God. Solomon clung to these women in love. And as he clung to them in love, we see that he has lost his real love, or his first love, or his true love. Let's say true love. And remember, Solomon started out by loving God and God commending him for this is the way forward. This is the biblical dream that God has for us all, that we would love him and that we, would respond with love because of his love, that it's a mutual love relationship that God is after here, nothing more, nothing less. And the most telling setting is that of a wedding, or vows. The Ten Commandments are more like vows than they are just a list of orders that are barked out by a military sergeant. It's the vows of loving commitment that we hear, and the Ten Commandments start off with God's loving commitment. We might say the first commandment is God's own commandment about himself, that I am your God. God doesn't have to say anything more than that. I am your God, and I'll be your God. He's making that promise. I am your God. What more does he need to say? The 10, words that follow are our response. What does it look like to respond in love to God, who is pronouncing his love for us? So the issue here is all about the heart. The word heart comes up like 6 different times in our very short passage here. By the time we get to verse 9, the word heart, I think, has come up 6 or 7 different times. And so that is what is to draw our attention, that Solomon's heart has been stolen away by his sexual desires or his sexual love affairs with all of these women. And indeed, it does seem like, the 700 wives and princesses and 300 concubines still doesn't compare to Wilt claim of 20,000. It just cracks me up. Always cracked me up that Wilt threw that number out there. And he even tells you how he calculated that number, that he actually did keep some records. Anyhow. I digress. For our intents and purposes here, though, the kingdom that God gave Solomon the keys to is now on a collision course. And the big question in our hearts, is, will God stick with human beings? That's always been the question, right? Whether it was Adam and Eve, or whether it was Noah, or even, whether it was the Israelites, first big act of rebellion, and now we have another, act of rebellion out of a king. It's always the same. Is God going to stick with this? Is God going to stick with humanity? And the answer is a resounding yes, because he is a lover, and his idea of love is about commitment. Our commitment is very shaky. Our commitment is because we don't really know the difference between good and evil, but we insist that we do. And so we just move forward in collision-like speed into so many things in life. And life is about the collisions that we, face, whether it's our collision or somebody else's collision. There are collisions all around in human drama, and that'll always be the case. And that's what makes this ancient writing so fascinating and telling, is that while, the people have changed, the subjects really don't. And all of this sex just makes Solomon crazy because he leaves the one that matters most, and that is God. And so, these women, yes, they are the problem, but it's these women's gods that now Solomon all of a sudden finds to be interesting and entertaining, and he finds it to be no problem that, that he could entertain their gods. It's not a big deal. And we are kind of astounded with the fact that the Lord has literally appeared to Solomon 2 different times. I always find it interesting that the people that I talk to are oftentimes, kind of put off with the idea that God doesn't speak to them directly, and he doesn't seem to turn up directly. But when we read the biblical account of the people that God did turn up to directly, we see that it doesn't really help. The people that I've talked to many times, and maybe even have reflected on this myself, is that I feel like, if God shows up, I'd really do what he says. But that's not what the biblical account says, that even in the face of God turning up, even in the face of God's direct words, that the human heart wants what it wants. And the drama that the Bible gives us is the drama of the human heart, and the perversion and the twisted nature of the human heart. And biblically speaking, the human heart is your whole self, that your brain is actually a servant to your heart. Your heart is like your soul, your personhood. Now we look at it as a medical, or a piece of anatomy, in our bodies that's only right here. Biblically, in the ancient world, and I think we still have this, is that we really understand that the heart is really where the action is. The brain follows the heart in some weird, strange sense. Now, when we take the heart out of the body, we see it's just a pumper. But we know that, when pains hit us emotionally, they hit us in the heart. They don't just hit us in the brain. We can feel it in our heart. In fact, blood pressure going up, stress is all, attacking the heart itself. So I think that the Bible remains to be the most fascinating of dialogues that we can engage in, because it engages, in a reality that we live out on a daily basis. But back to Solomon here and all of these women, it's really these women and their sex and their sexuality and their desirability that Solomon loves and he craves and he can't get enough of, that leads him to embrace their gods. As Simon Birch says, sex makes people crazy. Solomon, you're nuts. You're a mental case. And we're meant to say that. We're, as the reader, we should be saying, oh my God, Solomon, you're a mental case. How could you? Well, but we know how he could, because it's in all of us. We understand what he's going through. We understand the tensions of riches, and we understand the tensions, that power and responsibility tend to lead to a strange fogging of the imagination into a self-glorified manner. And that's what's going on here. And so the lists, there are 4 gods that Solomon appear in the list that Solomon goes after, but there's many more. It didn't matter. Whoever's god these women were, he was into, and he'd build something for them and he'd be like, yeah, baby, let's go see your God. So all of a sudden Solomon turns into this, Austin Powers character. Yeah, baby, let's go do your God. But the list of gods that are given here, Ashtoreth, Milcom, Chemosh, and Moloch, are very common ancient world gods that are representational of the problematic, views of religion. And I will say this, that really the issue that emerges here is the first commandment stuff. And it is the first, love stuff that God is addressing in the 10 commandments, that we ought to have God as our first love. The first commandment is I am yours and you are mine. We will be your God, we will be your people. You will be our God and our God only. We will have no other gods before you. It's just a very simple vow that we make. I will have no other gods before you. Just the same principle that I declared, on my own wedding ceremony towards my wife and my wife towards me, that I will have no other but you. You're it. I will be devoted to you. I will not whore myself out. I will not, come on, baby, let's go. I won't do that. No, you are it. I will make love to you 20,000 times, not, with 20,000 women. That is the promise. And so these gods are really the subject matter of the love breach that is going on with Solomon. It's not about the women as much as it is about the gods. All of a sudden, God has taken a back seat. All of a sudden, God is not even in the back seat. God is in the trailer, or maybe God's not even in the trailer. God has just been left, at home. And that is, the thing that really drives that wedge between us and God. And it's the same kind of wedge that drives a wedge between husband and wife whenever they're not faithful to one another. And so the heart attack that happens is the heart of loving God, and the attack that we allow to happen in our own lives whenever we entertain other gods in their nation. Now, these other gods, we don't have time to really break down all these gods, but there are some things that we really, some generalizations that we really ought to know. Our schools, our education, educational facilities today pretend like all religions are the same, and in much bending over backwards, to borrow a pun, maybe. That we do for the other religions is really the same kind of thing that Solomon is doing here with these religions. These religions around Milcom, Ashtoreth, Chemosh, and Moloch. Let me just say this. In the ancient world, they would make even the Satanists blush. These religions were not like Sunday school. This was not like your church. This is unlike anything you have ever seen before. This isn't even like the mosque. This isn't even like the synagogue. Not at all. Not at all. This is a wild place. The ancient temples were a place of unbelievable activity. Like I said, I believe that a Satanist would blush and have a hard time keeping up with what was going on in these temples, because these gods were okay with child sacrifices. These gods were okay with human sacrifices. These gods were okay with, you having sex with, temple priests, both male and female, and either way, you know what I mean by either way, right? Male, female, female, male, 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 female, female, doesn't matter. This is the sex that happens in these temples in some sort of pronouncement of a need for fertility. This is the wild world of the ancients. And this was normal. This was normal. Ladies and gentlemen, I got to tell you, this was the normal activity for the ancient temples. Going forward, even into Rome, just 2,000 years ago, this is the subject of Rome's temples and the Greek temples. All the temples of the gods were pretty much okay with these kind of activities. Now, the Romans detested child sacrifice, but on occasion they would allow for human sacrifice. A lot of people don't know that, but it's true. Read Will Durant, he'll tell you. And Will Durant is what we might call a liberal scholar, I mean, he's just saying what is true. And so what goes on here in these temples is deplorable, and God is against it. And here's the reason. Do you know why humans don't do the weird stuff anymore? And really that weird activity, which was so normalized, does not exist anymore. You can't go to any country and find people doing this. Do you know why? Because the Bible put parameters that are now generally accepted in humans' lives. If we would have run with any of these other religions into our modern society, we would be astoundingly weirdos. Go check it out for yourself. Do your own reading. But I'm telling you, that's what the real history books will tell you about these things. And so God finds this to be detestable because this is not what a relationship between, you and the real God who made the world looks like. God does not find these activities acceptable. Israel's temple was strikingly different because when you went to Israel's temple, you were expressing your own sin towards God or towards your neighbor and your need for the forgiveness that God had promised to give you. This is not heard of in the religion of Ashtaroth, Milcom, Chemosh, Moloch, and the host of other ancient, temples leading up into the temples of Rome and the temples of Greece, all of that. This stuff is unheard of in those temples. In fact, I would tell you that this is not the subject of stuff that you'll even hear in temples, and today, where there exist temples. So, God is not accepting of this kind of behavior, and God makes it very clear that this kind of behavior makes him angry. And why does, it seems like when we hear that God gets angry, that all of a sudden we roll our eyes like, oh, there you go, God's always getting angry. Oh, God's always getting angry. Oh, please, he ought to be angry because it's an issue of love. It's the issue of love that God is after in the biblical story, which is a huge love letter, and it's a huge novel of how God loves humanity, and he's pulling humanity away from their stupid ideas and into a real loving relationship with him where we love God and love neighbor. This is the substance of God's book only. Anyhow, God is angry with Solomon. That's the way we ought to, want it. We should not be offended by that. And he tells Solomon, he said, since you can't keep it in your pants, which has now led you can't keep it in my temple. You can't do what I've asked you to do. Since that is the case, I will tear this kingdom from you. However, God has kept a promise. He made a promise to David, who is far from perfect, but David never went after any foreign gods. Even though David, did not keep himself very sexually simple and sexually pure, he did not run after other gods like Solomon has. And that is what makes, David worth God saying, I will keep my promise to David because he did not go after other gods, but I will keep my promise to David by preserving one of the kingdom. He said, so God is going to allow the 10 tribes to be, taken over by Solomon's servants. And eventually the 10 tribes by 722 are going to be taken over by the Assyrians, and they're going to be the lost tribes of Israel. But the tribe of Judah is the tribe of promise that, God made even back to, Jacob's son, Judah, that there would be an eternal ruler that comes out of the tribe of Judah, like David did, like Solomon has, but we need someone better than Solomon, better than Judah, and that's exactly what Jesus Christ says. Someone better than Solomon is right in front of you, and that is me. And as a human level, he is from the tribe of Judah, but from a heavenly level, he is from God, because he is God. And it's what makes the story so awesome. It's the best story ever. There is nothing that compares. But this is really the beginning of the Jews being known, so remember that Judah is just one tribe out of the 12 tribes of Israel. And today, people don't even, refer to Israel as anything but the Jews, because it is only this one tribe that has been preserved, really. You don't hear, people say, well, I'm from the tribe of Asher, or I'm from the tribe of Dan, or the list goes on. People don't say that. They say I'm from the tribe of Judah. I'm a Jew. So anyhow, the story, though, is going to continue, because God says, I will preserve, because of my promise to David, that I would bring an eternal kingdom out of his line, which is going to be Jesus. The story is going to continue. The rest of the story of Israel is going to be, kind of a big toilet flush. And we'll look at that as time goes on. But the story is always about heart surgery. When God called Israel to Mount Sinai, he told them that it is a matter of the heart. It is a circumcision of the heart that God is after. He wants to trim your heart away from all things except your love for him. And that, my friends, is the heart surgery that God is doing in the lives of people in every continent today. Every ethnicity and every continent has God's activity of turning people's hearts to him, because humanity is still the same. Humanity is still a humanity that says the heart wants what it hearts, like that, kind of weirdo Woody said at one point in time. But this is the story that God is putting together, a story of circumcising the heart. A surgery that we've never really heard of, because we can't do it. It only can be done by God. Any circumcision of the heart would kill us if we tried to manage that on our own. We need God to do that surgery for us, which he can and which he will. And that's what we ought to be calling out for God. You can't help but to see the amazing grace that God has in all of this. Despite Solomon's wicked behavior, he still hangs in there by keeping his promise. His side of the bargain, his side of the love affair towards humanity, he will keep. And we can rely on that even today. So, my friends, the other gods. The other gods are always trying to suck us away from the love that God is wanting out of us. The other gods, is the subject of the real human drama. Everything else runs the risk of becoming the other gods, because the other gods always strip away our love for the one true living God. All right, my friends, that's where we'll end our time. We'll catch you next time